At 2 a.m., I'm camping on my own damn property when police lights start flashing. Some entitled HOA Karen in $200 pajamas is screaming at the deputy that I'm terrorizing the neighborhood by sitting by my own lake. "Ma'am, this is his property deed," the deputy says, handing back my paperwork with an apologetic shrug. Her face goes white. The cicadas suddenly stop chirping. Even nature knows what's coming. See, this woman didn't just call the cops on me for camping at my own lake. She'd been running an illegal business on my land for 3 years, stealing thousands from her neighbors and using my property as her personal playground, all while trying to destroy my family's reputation. But here's the kicker. She had no idea I'd been documenting everything. Every lie, every theft, every trespass. What would you do if someone called the police on you for using your own property? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. My name's Marcus Reeves, and 6 months ago I thought I'd bought paradise. 47 acres of Texas ranch land with a spring-fed lake so clear you can see ancient limestone 20 feet down. The smell of wild honeysuckle mixed with that clean water scent hits you the moment you step out of your truck. My wife Sarah and 16-year-old daughter Emma fell in love with the place instantly, especially Emma, who'd found her new favorite fishing spot where century-old oak trees created perfect shade over the crystal water. Everything was perfect until they built Willowbrook Estates next door, and I met Vivian Hartwell. Picture the most entitled HOA president you can imagine, then multiply that by 10. This woman drove a white BMW SUV worth more than most people's annual salary, wore designer clothes to check her mailbox, and had this signature move where she'd purse her lips and shake her head slowly whenever someone dared disagree with her, like she was dealing with a particularly stupid child. She'd moved here from California with her husband's tech money, and immediately declared herself the guardian of community standards. The trouble started on a perfect Sunday morning. I'm sitting on my dock with coffee, watching mist rise off the water like nature's own steam show, when suddenly I see 5 joggers running along my shoreline like they own the place. Now, I'd done enough property law research when buying the place to know that property rights are pretty straightforward. If you own it, you control access, period. So I walked over, friendly as you please, and explained this was private property, suggesting the public trail system about a mile away. They were actually apologetic and started to leave, until Vivian showed up. Here she comes, clicking across limestone in heels at 8 a.m. on a Sunday, carrying a folder like she's conducting official business. "Don't let him intimidate you," she tells the joggers, completely ignoring me. "Lake access is a grandfathered community amenity." She whips out this official-looking document claiming my lake had been designated Community Recreational Water Access since the subdivision was planned. I knew it was complete fabrication. I'd read every word of my deed and title insurance policy twice, but it looked legitimate enough that I didn't want to embarrass anyone in front of strangers. "Ma'am, I think there's been some confusion about the property boundaries." "The confusion," she interrupts, doing that head shake thing, "is thinking you can just block off amenities that affect everyone's property values. We have rights too." The joggers fled, embarrassed, but Vivian stayed, snapping photos of my dock, my fire pit, even the worn fishing trail. Her phone clicked constantly as she documented everything like she was building a legal case. That's when I realized this wasn't just some confused neighbor. This was someone with a plan. Within a week, she'd organized the Lake Preservation Committee and posted on Nextdoor about the hostile property owner trying to destroy community harmony. The harassment began immediately. Beer cans started appearing in my pristine water, sunscreen bottles got tossed in the reeds where Emma liked to catch bass, and suddenly there were strangers walking across my land at all hours treating it like a public park. I started finding systematic footprints in the mud near my dock every morning, the kind of organized wear pattern that suggested regular group activities. The crunch of gravel on my private road became constant as cars full of subdivision residents used my property like their personal recreation area. My insurance agent had warned me during the purchase process that liability issues could bankrupt property owners if someone got hurt on their land without permission. Suddenly, that conversation felt a lot more relevant. But here's what really got my attention. Vivian's desperation seemed way out of proportion for a simple property dispute. When someone fights that hard to claim something that isn't theirs, they're usually hiding something much bigger than simple entitlement. I just didn't realize yet that she'd been running an illegal operation on my land for months, stealing thousands from her neighbors while using my property as collateral for her scheme. The war was about to begin, and I had no idea how dirty she was willing to fight. 2 weeks later, Vivian dropped her first nuclear bomb, and I have to admit, the woman had style. She filed an official environmental complaint with the county claiming my reckless camping activities were contaminating the entire watershed. We're talking a formal hazard report complete with dramatic photos of my harmless fire pit, a petition signed by 37 neighbors, and testimony that I was dumping raw sewage directly into community water sources. The absolute audacity took my breath away. County Inspector Rodriguez showed up Tuesday morning looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Reeves, I'm legally required to investigate environmental contamination claims, even when they're," he paused diplomatically, "questionable." Poor guy had clearly been through HOA hell before. You could see it in his eyes, that special exhaustion that comes from dealing with suburban petty tyrants. I walked him around the property while he took water samples and checked our septic system, which was professionally installed 50 yards from the lake and maintained religiously. The whole time, Vivian lurked across the fence line in $200 yoga pants, photographing the inspection like she was documenting the environmental crime of the century. The woman probably had more pictures of my property than I did. But here's where I started learning chess instead of checkers. While Rodriguez tested water that was cleaner than most city tap supplies, I casually mentioned something that had been bugging me. "You know, Inspector, I've been wondering, with all these new houses draining into the same watershed, did the subdivision file their environmental impact study?" Rodriguez's clipboard stopped moving. "Their what study?" "Environmental impact assessment. Required for any development within 500 feet of natural water sources, right?" I'd done my homework after the first confrontation, spending nights reading county development codes until my eyes burned. The color drained from Vivian's face faster than water down a storm drain. Turns out Willowbrook Estates had skipped their mandatory environmental filing entirely, a $25,000 oversight that could halt all construction permits. The very thing Vivian was accusing me of, environmental negligence, she was guilty of on an industrial scale. Sometimes the best defense really is learning your opponent's playbook and using it against them. Rodriguez's official report arrived 3 days later. My water quality was pristine, my septic system exceeded code requirements, and my camping posed zero environmental risk. But the real Christmas morning was watching Vivian's expression when county enforcement delivered her HOA's environmental compliance notice, complete with $15,000 in mandatory testing fees and a 90-day deadline. That's when I learned something every property owner should tattoo on their brain. Adverse possession in Texas requires 10 years of continuous, obvious use that's hostile to the real owner. These people had been here 3 years, and I'd been politely asking them to leave since day one. Legally, they had the same claim to my land as I had to the moon. But Vivian wasn't done playing dirty. The harassment campaign shifted into overdrive, targeting the one thing that could break me: my family. Emma started coming home from the bus stop in tears because neighborhood kids were calling her father a water poisoner and family destroyer. One little girl, parroting her mother perfectly, told Emma, "My mommy says your daddy hates children and wants to hurt our community." Anonymous notes multiplied on our mailbox like weeds. "Selfish people don't belong here. Share or move. Your greed is showing." The constant taste of dust hung in the air from increased traffic as more residents decided my private road was their personal highway to town. That's when I stopped playing defense entirely. I installed a professional security system, motion sensors, night vision, cloud storage, the works. The kind of setup that would make a casino jealous. Within 1 week, I had documented 43 separate trespassing incidents, including families hosting birthday parties on my dock and teenagers using my lake as their personal swimming hole. The footage was pure gold. There's Vivian measuring my shoreline with a contractor's tape while coaching someone on her phone about establishing easement precedent through community use. There are parents teaching their kids to fish from my dock while explaining that mean Mr. Marcus was trying to steal their happiness. The entitlement was so thick you could cut it with a chainsaw. I kept a meticulous log, dates, times, GPS coordinates, photos of every trampled flower and discarded beer bottle. 30 years as an electrician teaches you that good documentation prevents 99% of legal headaches. Measure twice, cut once applies to property disputes just as much as electrical panels. The real jackpot came when I caught Vivian literally coaching neighbors on how to lie about timeline. "Tell him you've been using the lake since before he moved here," she instructed a group of parents. "Historical community use is legally binding." Except it wasn't. She was teaching people to commit perjury to support a non-existent legal claim. The war was officially on, and she was about to learn that I fight with facts, not fiction. Vivian's next attack was pure psychological warfare wrapped in legal letterhead. A thick certified mail envelope landed on my doorstep Thursday morning. The kind that makes your coffee taste like ash before you even open it. Inside was a cease and desist letter from Hartwell and Associates Legal Services demanding I stop blocking historic community access and harassing families exercising established easement rights. The thing looked official enough to fool a judge, complete with gold embossing and enough legal jargon to choke a courthouse. It threatened immediate lawsuits for intentional interference with recreational activities and claimed my camping violated noise ordinances. Either Vivian had completely lost touch with reality, or she was throwing serious money at intimidating me into submission. But the real mind game was her neighborhood safety patrol. Grown adults with clipboards lurking around my property line like discount private investigators, photographing me every time I stepped outside. The constant crunch of gravel from their surveillance vehicles became my new morning alarm clock. Nothing says community harmony like organized stalking. That weekend, I fought back the only way that matters, with cold, hard facts. The county courthouse basement smelled like dust and decades of bureaucratic grudges, but those musty records contained pure legal gold. I traced my property's chain of title back 150 years, through cattle ranchers, oil speculators, and finally to Uncle Ray's crystal-clear will that specified exclusive lake rights in perpetuity. Here's what every property owner needs burned into their brain. Chain of title always trumps HOA covenants. It's like constitutional law versus city parking tickets. There's simply no contest. Vivian could have hired Clarence Darrow himself, and it wouldn't matter against 150 years of documented ownership. Meanwhile, my security cameras were capturing a masterclass in suburban entitlement. Families treated my shoreline like a public dump, leaving grass clippings and dog waste bags scattered along the limestone. Someone had built an unauthorized floating dock in the shallow cove, complete with a hand-painted community fishing area sign that made my blood pressure spike every time I saw it. The real jaw-dropper was the tackle box Sarah found hidden in the cattails, stuffed with fishing licenses, bottle openers, and a handwritten schedule rotating lake maintenance duties among different subdivision families. They weren't just trespassing. They'd created a parallel property management system on my land with the organizational skills of a small corporation. I started tallying damages with the methodical precision that 30 years of electrical contracting had drilled into me. Landscaping repair from trampled native wildflowers, $3,200. Increased insurance premiums from liability exposure, $1,800 annually. Unauthorized dock removal and shoreline restoration, $5,400. The numbers climbed faster than a Texas electric bill in August. That's when I called Uncle Ray's old attorney, Bill Patterson, who'd been practicing property law since before Vivian learned to spell easement. His first question made me grin. "Marcus, you still got that 1943 survey Ray mentioned in his will?" When I produced it from my filing cabinet, Bill's weathered face lit up like he'd struck oil. "Son, This survey establishes riparian rights that predate their subdivision by 60 years. These people have about as much legal claim to your lake as they do to the Alamo. My counter-strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Give them enough rope to hang themselves while documenting every twist. I upgraded to GPS-enabled trail cameras that time-stamped every trespass with courtroom precision. Every unauthorized footprint, every discarded beer can, every moment of community recreation got logged like evidence in a murder trial. The midnight camping confrontation wasn't random. Vivian had been monitoring my Facebook posts like a jealous ex-girlfriend, waiting for the perfect opportunity to manufacture a crisis. She probably spent hours planning that 2 a.m. wellness check, imagining how she'd finally get me arrested on my own property. But when Deputy Rodriguez arrived and I calmly handed him my property deed, original survey, and attorney's business card, watching Vivian's smug confidence evaporate was better than Christmas morning. You could practically see the moment she realized her legal intimidation campaign had just face-planted harder than a drunk tourist at South by Southwest. The woman who'd been so sure of her righteous authority suddenly looked like a designer pajama-wearing trespasser caught red-handed on someone else's land. Because that's exactly what she was. But I knew this was just foreplay. Desperate people make desperate moves, and Vivian was about to get truly creative with her next escalation. The kind of creative that leaves evidence trails visible from space and gives prosecutors the kind of cases they frame on their office walls. The real war was just beginning, and I was finally ready to fight it with everything I had. Vivian's nuclear option was pure theatrical genius, and I'll give the woman credit. She committed to the performance. She waltzed into the sheriff's office wearing her most expensive victim costume, complete with trembling hands and carefully applied tears, claiming I'd threatened her with physical violence and property destruction. According to her Oscar-worthy testimony, the dangerous neighbor had been stalking innocent families and making terroristic threats against community safety. The deputy who took her statement later told me it was the most elaborate fiction he'd ever seen presented as sworn testimony. She'd brought printed screenshots of my Facebook posts, twisted completely out of context, claiming my security footage was evidence of obsessive predatory surveillance. In Vivian's creative universe, documenting trespassing on my own property was somehow proof that I was targeting neighborhood children. Her masterpiece was attempting to get a restraining order based on complete fabrication. She swore under oath that I'd cornered her at Randall's grocery store, threatened to make her pay for interfering, and followed her home in a menacing and intimidating manner. The woman even brought witnesses, 3 neighborhood moms who'd apparently seen this terrifying encounter that never happened. Except I had a time-stamped receipt from Lowe's hardware store 30 miles away during her alleged confrontation, plus continuous security footage showing my truck never left my driveway that entire afternoon. Sometimes the best legal defense is just living your life honestly while crazy people dig their own graves. While Vivian was auditioning for Victim of the Year, my private investigator was uncovering her real resume. Turns out our suburban terrorist had quite the professional background in manufactured property disputes. Her California real estate license had been suspended for fraudulent misrepresentation and client manipulation after she'd orchestrated 3 separate neighborhood conflicts for personal profit. But here's the kicker that made my blood run cold. My PI found documentation of an identical lake access dispute in Vivian's previous San Diego neighborhood. Same environmental complaints, same harassment tactics, same false police reports, like she was following a detailed playbook for property theft through community manipulation. That HOA had eventually paid her $40,000 in settlement fees just to make the legal nightmare stop and watch her move away. I was dealing with a professional con artist who'd perfected the art of stealing property through suburban warfare. My security cameras were capturing evidence that would make any prosecutor's career. Time-lapse footage showed systematic invasion patterns, coordinated groups arriving with coolers, lawn chairs, and fishing equipment like they were visiting a state park. Parents coached children to wave at my cameras while explaining that mean Mr. Marcus was trying to steal their playground. The gaslighting was so sophisticated it belonged in a psychology textbook. but Vivian's grand finale was pure audacity theater. She organized a community environmental cleanup day at my lake, complete with 23 adults, 15 children, and enough cleaning supplies to sanitize Lake Travis. They arrived Saturday morning with trash bags, pool skimmers, and a handmade banner reading, "Neighbors caring for our water." I came home to find what looked like a small music festival on my property. Families spread across my shoreline like conquering settlers, children splashing in my lake while parents live-streamed their volunteer heroism on Instagram. Someone had brought a portable speaker system blasting music loud enough to register on seismic equipment. They weren't just trespassing, they were staging a full-scale occupation while portraying themselves as environmental saints. From 30 years of electrical work, I'd learned that the best way to handle dangerous situations is stay calm and follow protocol. Instead of confronting an angry mob, I called Sheriff Rodriguez and started documenting everything with my phone. "Sheriff, this is Marcus Reeves. I've got nearly 40 people staging an unauthorized event on my private property, refusing to leave, and claiming they're performing community service on land they don't own." Rodriguez arrived to find what looked like a neighborhood block party happening on my dock, complete with a potluck spread and children's pool toys floating in my lake. When he asked to see permits for the cleanup event, Vivian's confident performance finally cracked. "Permits? We don't need permits to care for our community resources." "Ma'am, this is private property. You need the owner's written permission to be here, period." The look on her face when reality hit was worth every sleepless night she'd caused my family. Watching 40 people pack up their environmental theater and march off my property like a defeated army was satisfying beyond words. But the real victory was hearing several parents apologize quietly, admitting they'd been completely misled. "We honestly thought this was community land," one embarrassed mother whispered. "Vivian showed us official-looking documents." That's when the full scope of her con game became clear. But my private investigator had just delivered information that would expose something even bigger than property fraud. Something that would turn this entire neighborhood upside down. Monday morning, my private investigator walked into my kitchen carrying a manila folder that would change everything I thought I knew about this war. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the musty scent of legal documents as he spread papers across my breakfast table like he was laying out evidence in a murder trial. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this," he said, pointing to bank records highlighted in yellow. "Vivian hasn't just been stealing your property. She's been running a textbook embezzlement operation that would impress the FBI." The forensic accountant's report read like a graduate course in suburban theft. For 18 months, Vivian had been diverting HOA funds into her personal accounts through a shell company called Willowbrook Environmental Solutions. Monthly assessments of $200 per household for community water feature maintenance had been flowing directly into her checking account, while she simultaneously tried to steal legal access to the very lake residents thought they were paying to maintain. The residents had literally been paying her to steal from them. The woman was charging people $200 a month to use my property without permission while pocketing every penny. The audacity made my head spin. But that bombshell was nothing compared to what came next. The PI slid a county surveyor's report across the table, and the words hit me like a lightning strike. "Boundary discrepancy, residential structures located entirely on adjacent private property." My coffee mug stopped halfway to my lips. "What does that mean?" "It means Willowbrook Estates was built on your land, Marcus. All of it." The room went dead quiet, except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. That 1943 survey I'd found in Uncle Ray's files wasn't just proof of my lake ownership, it was evidence that the entire subdivision was sitting on property that belonged to me. The 1950s survey the developers had used was off by 400 feet, due to a clerical error that nobody had bothered to correct for 70 years. Every manicured lawn, every two-story colonial, every decorative mailbox in that subdivision was technically mine. 43 families were unknowingly living on stolen land, paying mortgages for houses built on property that was never legally for sale. The historical timeline painted a picture that made my stomach twist. Uncle Ray had given the developers temporary access in 1995 for construction, a handshake agreement that expired in 1998 when building was supposed to be finished. But they'd kept selling lots using fraudulent boundary maps, and nobody had questioned the paperwork because rural land conflicts were rare back then. From my electrical work, I knew enough about property law to understand the implications immediately. Adverse possession in Texas requires hostile use for 10 years minimum, but when the original access was permissive, meaning the owner gave permission, the legal clock never starts ticking. These weren't squatters. They were victims of developer fraud who'd bought homes with worthless title insurance that specifically excluded survey errors and boundary disputes. Suddenly, 3 years of Vivian's vicious harassment made perfect sense. The woman had seen the survey discrepancies in the original title paperwork when she'd moved here. Her entire campaign against my family wasn't righteous community advocacy. It was a desperate preemptive strike to establish adverse possession before I discovered I owned everything she was trying to protect. Every false police report, every environmental complaint, every manufactured crisis had been calculated, moves in a con game designed to steal an entire subdivision through community manipulation and legal intimidation. The nuclear option was crystal clear. I could demand immediate property vacation, forcing innocent families from homes they'd bought in good faith. Or I could negotiate settlements that would make me wealthy beyond imagination, while destroying a community of people who'd done nothing wrong except trust their real estate agents. But Emma's question cut through all the legal strategy like a blade. Dad, what happens to my friends when their families lose their houses? That's when I realized this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about choosing what kind of man I wanted to be. The war room smell of fresh coffee and legal documents filled my kitchen as I assembled the most unlikely dream team Texas had ever seen. Bill Patterson, Uncle Ray's crusty old attorney who'd been practicing property law since dirt was invented. Jennifer Morgan, an environmental consultant who could analyze water quality faster than most people could spell ecosystem. Marcus Williams, a forensic accountant who tracked stolen money like a bloodhound with a PhD. And the crown jewel, retired Judge Helen Morrison, who took one look at my evidence and said, "Son, this is the most entertaining fraud case I've seen in 30 years. Count me in." My strategy had 3 phases, learned from decades of complex electrical jobs. Establish your foundation, build your framework, then connect everything without electrocuting anyone. Phase 1 was filing a quiet title action, basically forcing everyone to prove their property claims in open court where documentation beats emotion every time. I'd learned that principle during my apprenticeship. When in doubt, check the blueprint, because feelings don't override facts. Phase 2 was the personal lawsuit against Vivian for embezzlement, harassment, and what Bill chuckled about calling being a professional pain in the ass with criminal intent. But Phase 3 was the delicate part, delivering justice without destroying innocent families who'd been played harder than a rigged carnival game. The legal framework was simpler than most people think once you strip away the lawyer speak. Property ownership is like electrical current. It flows along established paths, and you can't just redirect it because you want different results. I had 150 years of documented ownership. They had survey maps with more fiction than a Stephen King novel. But here's what shocked me during my research. Most property disputes never see a courtroom because the real owners don't know how to fight back effectively. The key is documentation that would make an IRS auditor weep with joy, combined with patience that would exhaust a saint. My community outreach started with individual coffee meetings, not legal threats. These weren't enemies. They were neighbors who'd been conned by a professional criminal. Patterson, the sweet elderly widow next door, nearly cried when I showed her the real property boundaries. "I always wondered why our deed looked different," she whispered, her coffee cup rattling against the saucer. "But the bank approved everything, so we figured the lawyers knew what they were doing." Jimmy Morrison, the contractor who'd built half the subdivision, confirmed my worst fears when he saw the original survey maps. "I tried telling the developer those property lines were wrong back in '95, he said, pointing to obvious discrepancies with calloused fingers. "But he said the lawyers had triple-checked everything, I was just the guy swinging the hammer. The evidence compilation was like creating the world's most depressing electrical schematic, except instead of tracking voltage, I was tracking 3 years of systematic fraud. Security footage edited into a timeline that would make Hollywood jealous. Financial records proving Vivian's embezzlement operation had been running since her 3rd month as HOA president. Environmental studies showing my lake was cleaner than most city tap water, completely destroying her pollution narrative. The numbers were staggering. $89,000 in unauthorized land use fees, plus legal costs, business losses from her harassment campaign, and punitive damages for what Bill called conduct so outrageous it offends basic human decency. Total demand, $134,000, offset against reasonable easement agreements for families who wanted legal access. But the real preparation was psychological warfare. Vivian had spent 3 years trying to gaslight my family into believing we were the problem. Now it was time to let sunlight disinfect her lies. When Channel 7 called about the property dispute, I handed them the complete evidence file. "Tell the whole truth," I said. "These families deserve to know what really happened to them." Sarah handled our family's emotional prep with the efficiency that only military wives possess. Stress management strategies, media attention protocols, and clear communication about why we were choosing justice over revenge. Emma stunned us by volunteering to speak at the upcoming town council meeting about how community bullying affects entire families, not just the immediate targets. The community education packet became my masterpiece. Clear timelines, financial documentation, and most importantly, proposed solutions that protected innocent homeowners while ensuring consequences for criminal behavior. Every page was designed to answer the question, how do we fix this mess without destroying people who did nothing wrong? But the real preparation happened during my nightly walks around that crystal-clear lake, listening to water gently lapping against limestone shores that had witnessed 150 years of human drama. This wasn't about property rights anymore. It was about proving that communities could heal from deception when good people chose courage over convenience. Vivian was about to learn that desperate people make desperate mistakes, and desperate mistakes leave evidence trails visible from orbit. I was finally ready to follow those trails straight into open court, where lies go to die and truth gets the last word. The final battle was coming, and I'd never been more ready for anything in my life. Vivian's descent into suburban terrorism reached artistic levels when she declared war on my security system at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. My phone exploded with motion alerts as someone crept around my property armed with a paintball gun, systematically coating every visible camera with neon pink paint. The woman had apparently binge-watched enough heist movies to think disabling surveillance would magically erase 3 years of evidence already living in cloud servers across multiple states. The irony was chef's kiss perfect. She was creating fresh evidence of criminal behavior while trying to destroy old evidence of criminal behavior. What she didn't know was that my electrical contractor paranoia had led me to install backup cameras she'd never spotted, capturing high-definition footage of her tiptoeing around my land in $300 athletic wear like some deranged suburban ninja. But her midnight protest spectacular was pure artistic genius. 23 cars lined up on my private road at 1 a.m., honking horns in coordinated patterns while passengers aimed flashlights at my house like the world's most pathetic light show. The sound was incredible. Imagine a traffic jam having an argument with a mariachi band, all conducted by someone who'd never heard music before. My neighbors half a mile away called 911 thinking there was a multi-car accident. Even the local deer population evacuated. I didn't see wildlife for 3 days after that acoustic assault. Emma woke up crying, asking if we were under attack, while Sarah grabbed our emergency flashlight, wondering if this was how property disputes ended in Texas. Sheriff Rodriguez arrived to find what looked like an extremely angry flash mob occupying my driveway. "Ma'am, it's past midnight, this is private property, and you're disturbing the peace," he told Vivian with the patience of a man who'd clearly dealt with HOA drama before. Watching 23 cars slink away like defeated protesters was almost worth the sleep deprivation. Meanwhile, my security upgrades were capturing evidence that would make federal prosecutors frame copies for their office walls. Every paintball splatter, every coordinated horn blast, every conspiracy to commit harassment got documented with GPS timestamps and audio clarity that would impress NASA. But Vivian's insurance fraud masterpiece proved that desperation really does breed creativity. She filed a $18,000 personal injury claim against my homeowner's policy, claiming my aggressive security measures had caused her to trip and suffer severe ankle damage while exercising legitimate community access rights. The woman had apparently forgotten that insurance investigators aren't suburbanites who believe whatever sounds official. When State Farm's fraud specialist reviewed my security footage, showing Vivian walking perfectly normally at the exact time she claimed to be writhing in agony, he just shook his head. "Ma'am, this is textbook insurance fraud. You might want to withdraw this before we notify law enforcement." Her environmental warfare campaign was equally impressive and equally stupid. Vivian contacted the Sierra Club, Greenpeace, and local environmental groups with elaborate reports about illegal dumping and systematic water contamination at my lake, complete with doctored photos and fabricated test results that would have impressed a Hollywood prop department. Except environmental activists aren't gullible HOA members. They actually verify claims before launching campaigns. When the Sierra Club sent their water quality expert to investigate Vivian's pollution allegations, they discovered my lake was cleaner than the city reservoir and immediately nominated it for a conservation award. The very groups she'd tried to weaponize against me ended up offering to help protect my property from development. My response strategy was beautiful in its simplicity: document everything, stay calm, and watch her create enough evidence to convict herself twice over. From my electrician days, I'd learned that the best way to handle dangerous situations is follow safety protocols religiously. In this case, that meant police reports with timestamps, GPS coordinates, and video evidence for every single incident. The community tide was turning faster than lake water through limestone. The HOA board unanimously voted to remove Vivian as president after the forensic accountant revealed her embezzlement scheme had cost residents over $47,000 in stolen fees. Parents who'd coached their children to harass Emma were now quietly apologizing, admitting they'd been manipulated into participating in something they finally understood was completely wrong. Local businesses started refusing to participate in her boycott campaigns after word spread about the criminal investigations. The woman who'd once commanded neighborhood respect through fear and manipulation was rapidly becoming a social pariah whose own neighbors crossed streets to avoid uncomfortable conversations. But Vivian's final gambit revealed just how disconnected from reality she'd become. She planned to make one last desperate stand at the monthly town council meeting, convinced she could rally community support against the dangerous neighbor threatening innocent families. She had no idea I'd been preparing for exactly that opportunity, with evidence that would expose her crimes to the entire community in the most public forum possible. The final showdown was coming, and I'd never felt more ready for anything in my life. Vivian's final act of desperation was launching a full-scale public relations war that would have impressed a political campaign manager. She contacted Channel 7 News, claiming a wealthy landowner was terrorizing working families and threatening to destroy an entire neighborhood over petty property disputes. Her media strategy was pure genius. Frame herself as David fighting Goliath, complete with tearful interviews about fearing for her children's safety from the increasingly unstable neighbor. The woman actually organized a children and family safety rally in the town square, complete with professionally printed signs reading, "Protect our kids," and "Community over greed." She'd somehow convinced 37 people to show up with their children, creating photo opportunities that would make any politician jealous. Local news cameras captured heartbreaking footage of families holding hands, while Vivian delivered an Oscar-worthy performance about corporate bullies trying to steal community amenities from hardworking parents. But investigative journalism isn't suburban gossip, and Channel 7's reporter started asking uncomfortable questions that Vivian hadn't prepared for. When presented with my documentation package, security footage, property surveys, embezzlement evidence, and 3 years of systematic harassment records, the entire narrative flipped faster than a pancake on Sunday morning. The same reporter who'd arrived expecting to interview a community advocate found herself documenting one of the most elaborate property fraud schemes in county history. My security footage compilation showing organized trespassing, the forensic accountant's embezzlement report, and county records proving the subdivision was built on my land, created a story that made front-page news for completely different reasons than Vivian had intended. Meanwhile, her desperate attempt to manufacture a final crisis backfired spectacularly. Vivian showed up at my property with a Channel 7 news crew, claiming she needed to document environmental damage for her investigative exposé. The woman actually trespassed onto my land with cameras rolling, expecting to create footage of me aggressively confronting innocent community advocates. What she got instead was calm, professional documentation of criminal trespass in progress, broadcast live on evening news. When I politely asked the news crew to verify my property boundaries before filming and showed them my deed and survey maps, the story became HOA President Caught Trespassing During Live News Interview. The footage of Vivian's face when she realized her media stunt had backfired went viral on social media within hours. Her restraining order gambit was the final nail in her credibility coffin. Based on completely fabricated claims that I'd stalked and threatened her family, she filed for emergency protection citing escalating dangerous behavior and credible threats of violence. The woman showed up to court with 3 character witnesses prepared to testify about my increasingly erratic conduct. Except I had something better than character witnesses. I had continuous security footage proving I'd never been within 200 yards of her property, timestamps showing her alleged encounters were physically impossible, and documentation that every claimed threat had occurred while I was provably elsewhere. When her own attorney saw my evidence package, he quietly advised her to withdraw the petition before perjury charges got added to her growing legal problems. The community fracture was becoming irreversible as more residents discovered the truth about their property situation. Parents who'd encouraged their children to harass Emma were now desperately trying to apologize for participating in what they finally understood was systematic criminal harassment. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to address what they euphemistically termed recent leadership irregularities. Suburban bureaucrats speak for, "Our president is a criminal, and we're all potentially liable." Local gossip, which had been Vivian's most powerful weapon, turned against her with the fury of a Texas tornado. Coffee shop conversations that once focused on my selfishness now centered on her embezzlement and fraud. Neighborhood WhatsApp groups that had amplified her propaganda were now sharing links to news articles about property fraud and discussing whether they needed their own attorneys. The smell of fear was thick as August humidity when I walked into Randall's grocery store and watched conversations stop mid-sentence. But instead of the hostile stares I'd endured for months, I saw embarrassment, concern, and the kind of nervous energy that comes when people realize they've been played harder than a fiddle at a county fair. Vivian's final gambit was organizing what she called a community emergency meeting at the town council chamber, where she planned to make one last desperate plea for public support. Her remaining allies, down to about 8 die-hard supporters who either hadn't seen the news coverage or refused to believe it, were preparing for what they thought would be their moment to expose my fraud to local officials. She had no idea that I'd been coordinating with District Attorney Patricia Wells, who'd requested permission to attend the meeting as an observer. Criminal prosecutors love cases with this much documentation, especially when the defendant helpfully creates new evidence in public forums. The final showdown was 48 hours away, and Vivian was about to discover that lies have short legs, while truth runs marathons. The town council chamber on Thursday night looked like the season finale of a reality show nobody wanted to be on. 237 people packed into a space designed for maybe 60, with standing room only and tension thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Local news crews had set up cameras in the back, social media was live streaming everything, and you could practically taste the electricity in the air as neighbors who'd been feuding for months finally faced each other in public. Vivian arrived fashionably late with her 8 remaining supporters, dressed like she was attending a funeral, which in hindsight was pretty accurate since she was about to bury her own credibility. She'd somehow managed to get herself added to the public comment period, claiming she needed to address urgent community safety concerns about my escalating dangerous behavior. I sat in the front row with Sarah, Emma, and attorney Bill Patterson, surrounded by 3 thick binders of evidence and feeling calmer than I had in months. Behind us sat District Attorney Patricia Wells, who'd quietly slipped in during the opening remarks with the kind of professional neutrality that prosecutors wear when they're watching suspects dig their own graves. Mayor Johnson called Vivian to the podium, and she launched into a performance that belonged on Broadway. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here tonight because one man's greed is threatening to destroy our entire community," she began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Marcus Reeves has used intimidation, harassment, and legal threats to terrorize innocent families who simply want to enjoy the natural beauty that brought us all to this wonderful neighborhood." She pulled out poster-sized photos of my security cameras, claiming they were evidence of obsessive surveillance designed to intimidate children and families. She showed pictures of my property boundary signs, calling them aggressive territorial marking that created a climate of fear. The woman even had charts showing how my hostile behavior had affected local property values and community mental health. But when Mayor Johnson asked for specific examples of threats or violence, Vivian's story started unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. "He films us constantly," she said, "creating a surveillance state that makes families afraid to let their children play outside." When asked if my cameras were on my own property, her answer got significantly less confident. That's when Bill Patterson stood up and asked for permission to present relevant documentation regarding the property dispute. What happened next was the most beautiful 15 minutes of public truth-telling I'd ever witnessed. Bill calmly explained that Willowbrook Estates had been built entirely on my land due to a 70-year-old survey error, that residents had been unknowingly trespassing for 3 years, and that my surveillance was actually documentation of criminal activity on my own property. The audible gasps when he revealed the property boundary truth were nothing compared to the reaction when the forensic accountant's report got read into the public record. $47,000 in embezzled HOA funds, fake invoices for services that never existed, a shell company designed specifically to steal from the very residents Vivian claimed to represent. But the real mic drop moment came when Sheriff Rodriguez stood up and announced that criminal charges were being filed for embezzlement, fraud, and filing false police reports. "Based on extensive evidence provided by Mr. Reeves," he said, "we've determined that Ms. Hartwell has committed multiple felonies over an 18-month period." Vivian's face went through every color in the spectrum before settling on a shade of gray that matched courthouse concrete. Her remaining supporters looked like they'd been hit by lightning as the full scope of her deception became clear. Several people actually got up and walked out, shaking their heads in disgust. Emma chose that moment to deliver the knockout punch. My 16-year-old daughter walked to the podium with more composure than most adults and said, "Mrs. Hartwell told everyone my dad was a dangerous bully who hated children. But the real bully was the adult who taught kids to lie about their neighbors and convinced parents that harassment was community service." The silence in that room was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning cycling on and the distant sound of traffic outside, but nobody moved, nobody whispered, nobody even seemed to breathe. Emma continued, "My dad could have kicked everyone out of their houses the day he discovered the property boundaries were wrong. Instead, he's offering fair easement agreements so families don't lose their homes. That's not what bullies do." When the applause started, it built like a thunderstorm rolling across the hill country. Parents who'd encouraged their children to harass Emma were now clapping for her courage. Neighbors who'd participated in Vivian's harassment campaign were on their feet, finally understanding they'd been weaponized against an innocent family. Vivian tried to interrupt, claiming the evidence was fabricated and the charges were retaliation, but Mayor Johnson quietly asked security to escort her from the building when she refused to return to her seat. Watching her walk out of that chamber, isolated and defeated, was the sweetest victory I'd ever tasted. Justice was finally being served, and the whole community was witnessing it happen. 6 months later, justice looked like a crystal-clear lake reflecting autumn oak leaves while children's laughter echoed across water that had once been a battlefield. Vivian pleaded guilty to felony embezzlement and received 18 months probation, plus restitution of $47,000 to the HOA, and an additional $89,000 to my family for property damage and harassment. Her house went up for sale 3 days after sentencing, and she moved to Arizona, where hopefully the desert air might cure her of suburban terrorism. The civil lawsuit settlement was everything my attorney had promised, and more. Beyond financial compensation, the agreement included a formal apology letter from Vivian acknowledging her systematic harassment and fraudulent conduct, which got read at the next HOA meeting. Watching grown adults who'd participated in her campaign squirm in their seats while the truth got officially recorded was worth every sleepless night she'd caused. But the real victory was watching our community heal like broken bones growing back stronger. The property boundary situation got resolved through individual easement agreements that were fair to everyone. Homeowners paid reasonable fees for legal access to land they'd unknowingly been using, while I maintained ownership and control over my property. Nobody lost their homes, nobody went bankrupt, and everybody learned valuable lessons about reading the fine print on real estate transactions. Emma's essay about property rights and community bullying won the state high school writing contest and earned her a full scholarship to UT's journalism program. Sometimes standing up to bullies means standing up for everyone they've hurt, she wrote, including the people who don't realize they're being manipulated. My daughter had learned lessons about courage and justice that no classroom could have taught. Sarah started a neighborhood mediation service that's helped resolve 17 property disputes without lawyers or lawsuits. Her approach is simple: get all the facts on the table, treat everyone with respect, and remember that good neighbors can disagree without becoming enemies. She's become the unofficial community peacekeeper, and her phone rings constantly with people asking for help navigating conflicts before they explode into warfare. The Environmental Scholarship Fund, seeded with settlement money, has awarded $15,000 annually to first-generation college students pursuing environmental law or conservation science. The first recipient was Emma's former bully, whose mother had been manipulated into Vivian's harassment campaign. Sometimes the best revenge really is helping people become better than they were. Our annual Good Neighbors Lake Day has become the social event of the year, drawing over 500 people for fishing, swimming, barbecue, and community building. Local politicians attend to show support for property rights and peaceful conflict resolution. Children who once weren't allowed to speak to Emma now compete to see who can catch the biggest bass from my dock. The HOA restructured completely, implementing financial transparency requirements and term limits that prevent future Vivians from consolidating power. Every monthly meeting includes a treasurer's report with receipts, and major expenditures require membership votes. The new president, Mrs. Patterson, jokes that running an HOA should be boring. If it's exciting, somebody's probably stealing something. Local law enforcement now uses our case as a training example for property dispute investigations. Sheriff Rodriguez speaks at community meetings about the importance of documentation and professional response to harassment. Mr. Reeves did everything right, he tells audiences, stayed calm, documented everything, and let the legal system work. That's how justice happens. The lake itself has become a conservation showcase, designated as a protected watershed by the county and monitored by environmental science students from the university. The water quality remains pristine. Native plant restoration has created habitat for endangered birds, and the whole ecosystem serves as a living classroom for sustainable land management. 3 years of hell taught my family that communities can heal from deception when good people choose courage over convenience. We learned that justice isn't revenge. It's accountability combined with the wisdom to help people become better than they were. We discovered that standing up for what's right sometimes costs everything you have, but doing nothing costs even more. Most importantly, we proved that bad neighbors eventually leave, but good communities last forever. Your property rights matter. Don't let bullies steal them through intimidation or manufactured conflicts. Document everything, stay calm, trust the legal system, and remember that the truth always wins when it's properly presented. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and helping others do the same. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. I want to see how widespread these problems really are. Subscribe for more property rights victories and legal revenge stories and hit that notification bell because next week's story will blow your mind.